The roundtable is called Envision the Future with Robots. As you know, every week, every Stefan Days week, we organize at least one roundtable discussion. This year we decided to organize this because there is in parallel organized the largest research and development conference in the field of robotics in Cankarov Dom, which ends today. So we said, okay, this is the topic will be robotics for this time. So robotics has become one of the most attractive fields in R&D in today's life, both in the scientific and in the technological side. It opens, as I said, not only technological and technical questions, but many questions, a vast variety of societal and philosophic questions. It is the field is multidisciplinary, depends on the growth of many other fields, and in engineering, natural sciences, if you want new materials, computers, artificial intelligence, sensors, nanotechnologies, electronics, or whatever you can mention, you have it here. Mechanics, but also humanities, and even medicine, if you want. The first robots were introduced in industry in middle of 60s. Industry is still the main user of robotics, but we are just about to face, I believe, a breakthrough, robots in everyday's life, and this is what we are going to talk about. Our today's speakers are distinguished scientists in this field, my good friends. These days, they, as I said, attend this EU Robotics Forum, so we have the chance to have them here. On the other hand, I have to apologize because as you see, one of the colleagues is missing, and this is Herman Bruinings. And you can already tell by his name, he's from Belgium. And so he was supposed to be here, but he's already at the airport because they changed his flight. He couldn't land to Brussels today, so he went to Frankfurt, and so he cannot come here today, unfortunately, and for obvious reasons. Nevertheless, here are my good friends, a very good friend, Bruno Siciliano. He already spoke in this room several times. He is from the Federico II University in Napoli. We know each other since '84. We are very good friends and collaborated in several projects together during this friendship since then. So he's very, very known to the world community in robotics, and his book, Introduction to Robotics, is one of the most popular textbooks, or maybe even the most popular textbook, I don't know, in the world, maybe. His background is control. He's also a co-editor of the basic, I call it Robotics Bible nowadays. It's called Handbook of Robotics, together with our very, very good friend, Usama Khatib from Stanford. So this is, we are meeting all the time. He's engaged in several boards in associations and received many honors and recognitions. I don't want to mention all of this. Just to mention one, maybe he served as president of the World IEEE Robotics Society. He also holds an ERC grant. So in Slovenia, we are all talking about ERC grant. You have one guy here, so this is how they look like. And then the other one, my youngest colleague, is Markus Grebenstein. He studied mechanical. He's a mechanical engineer at the Technical University of Munich. His doctorate is on the design of anthropomorphic, so human-like hands. He was, which was awarded by ETH, as it is called in Slovenia. It's from Zurich. He is currently head of the department on mechanical systems and components, and the deputy director of the DLR, Institute of Robotics and Mechatronics. So DLR is German NASA, if you want. This is, in my opinion, the largest research center in Europe, definitely, but probably in the world.
I'm not sure.
You're not sure, but it's definitely the largest research robotics center in Europe. And how many people you have employed there?
So whole DLR is 8,000.
The DLR, but the institute
200.
200. people specializing in robotics. So I want to mention also that I had a very long friendship with the previous director of this institute and the founder, Gerd Hirzinger, who already had a lecture here during Stefan Days, I think in 2007. You can find this on video lectures if you want. Markus is the newcomer, and no, the newcomer, the new manpower of the institute, so the future maybe president. So my plan is to pose questions today, but I would prefer that you ask during, if you have any questions, ideas, please also journalists, please ask immediately if you get to some point which would be of your interest, please ask questions immediately. So before we started, just to give you an idea, I take this occasion to say this. When I finished my PhD in 1985-86, my mentor, who was one of the pioneers of robotics, very well known, Miomir Vukobratovic, said to me, because my PhD was in robot kinematics, he said to me, you know, in robot kinematics, we already discovered everything. There is nothing else to do, and nothing else to investigate, he said. You have to change your field now. 3 years later, this was in 1988, I started to organize a conference on robot kinematics, which is the most important conference in the area. And this year will be organized in France, next year, 2 years later in Bologna, and then again in Ljubljani 2020. And every conference is full of new discoveries, so after 30 years, we still haven't left this field. So this is the charm of robotics. This is what I wanted to say. This is the charm of robotics, because the more you investigate, the more problems you find, and the more attractive it becomes. So this is enough for me. I would at this point start with an introduction, which is let us speak at the beginning about the state of the art, the achievements of robotics, what is happening in Europe, and this is how we start. We will start with the latest videos never showed on robotics, and Bruno, I ask you to start with this, and then this will open the discussion. And then Markus will show.
Yes, thanks very much, Jadranom, for the nice introduction. But I think you forgot the most important, passion. Because, I mean, I'm committed to robotics since 30 years. I finished my PhD in 1986. But robotics is only number 2, because my number 1 passion is captured by that logo, which is the logo of a Napoli football team. This is like life is priorities. So my calendar and my agenda is really dictated by the football matches. So first, I have to make sure that I can go to the stadium when Napoli plays home, and often it's the case that I can combine my travel with matches that Napoli plays away, both in Italy and abroad in Europe. So robotics is only number 2. So I hope someday I will get invited to speak about football, soccer, which I think it's a lot more fun. Yes, this was mentioned by Jadranom, and you will get an unofficial preview today. I mean, I have known Jadranom and my friends here at IJS, at Univerze Jožefa Stefana, and I want to share this with you informally. So this will be cut from the video lecture, because it's not official yet. But Jadranom mentioned the Springer Handbook of Robotics. This came out in 2008, and it was quite an achievement by the community. And now we are working on the 2nd edition of the Springer Handbook of Robotics. And this is a premiere because the book will come out only later in the spring. We were struggling to make it in time to launch it in connection with our flagship conference. I'm speaking about the IEEE International Conference on Robotics and Automation that this year takes place in Europe, in Stockholm in May. but probably we won't make it in time for the big launch, for the big event for Hkrati. So this will come out later in the summer, and there will be a launching event in connection with our second big conferences, which is IROS, which will take place in Daejeon in Korea in the fall. So this is a premiere of the cover of the second edition of the Spring Handbook of Robotics, which I've shared with Usama Khatib, professor of robotics at Stanford University, as one of the pioneers in our field. And also there is some kind of younger blood involved, and his name is Thorsten Kröger, who is a postdoc, who was a postdoc in Usama's team at Stanford, and he is an engineer working at Google Robotics in the Silicon Valley. And luckily enough, is one of the European brains who is coming back, because starting April 2017, he will be professor of robotics at Karlsruhe Institute of Technology in Karlsruhe in Germany, replacing Heinz Wern, who retired this year. So I decided to share this with you. The handbook was quite an achievement by the community, and in working on the second edition of the handbook, we thought that nowadays multimedia are essential. I mean, if you can publish technical papers, but especially in a field like robotics, showing what you have done in terms of videos, pictures, or maybe sharing some code, some software code is very important. So some of you, I mean, I'm speaking to the roboticists, they probably recall the iconic video which was produced by Usama Khatib on the occasion of Hkrati 2000 in San Francisco. This was a video which was capturing 50 years of development of robotics. So we have seen all kinds of applications, from the traditional one, the industrial one, which were already quite well assessed in the year 2000, at the end of the last century. But of course, the fields of application have expanded: medical, rescuing, hostile environments. So both Markus and myself are ready for the questions, for the discussion. In particular, Markus has got a lot more technical videos coming from his center, from DLR. And eventually I also have some technical videos which we might use, maybe in conjunction with the answers to your questions. So we are here. Just
Please go ahead.
I would just suggest to start the discussion, and
Yes.
I will just pick the videos.
Okay, so this is also good. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so let me just put the first question, then I leave you to you. But suppose I will now talk about the future. Suppose that what you saw, what we saw, and so even now we know that robots in factories we have now, they produce robots. So one day, it's not so far probably, robots will be able to reproduce themselves. So if you want to envision the future with robots 20, 30 years from now, is it quite possible that we will have to change the paradigm of life, because robots will produce plants, robotized plants, they will produce other animals and whatever, humanoids, and maybe they will prevail one day, and we will become minority, and there will be another life maybe in 1,000 years from now, completely artificial, which is still, let's say, natural. Okay, so is this a bad, positive, or a negative vision of the future? What would you? So I am talking about the societal acceptance of robots and everything related to this. Let's start in the end, and then we'll go back to technology and stuff.
So, from my perspective, the main difference between the human being and the robots is the creativity. And the big question to me is whether artificial intelligence will ever have creativity. Of course, it can turn out that creativity is nothing else than probabilistic distributions, and then we have a huge problem, because then artificial intelligence can can be creative, and can not only reproduce, it can develop new stuff, etc. But this is something we A, cannot stop, and B, we cannot see what the basics of creativity are currently. So it's very difficult to make a prognosis how life will be.
You know that there is a European conference. We are one of the members. It's on creativity of computers. So it's something being done. I think there is one thing we robots will never understand. This is politics, and politicians. Bruno.
Yeah, I think that I can just give an example. The old video that I show was produced in 2000 with the current limits of technology. Now to produce this video was a lot easier because of internet, because of software. So, but still, just as of course, you can believe in machine learning. You can believe, as Markus said, in big data, and of course, statistics help. But I see a world, a society, in which we can take advantage. I see at robotics in a very positive way. Well, I'm optimistic by nature, but I see that if we can gain something from robotics in terms of general wealth and having a sort of safer and better life, why not? Then, we can devote ourselves to, maybe we will just enjoy, just the good time, the leisure, and we will rely on this technology, which might be useful also for having a sort of companion in our life. I don't think there might be cases in which you definitely want to replace a human with an automaton, because maybe it's kind of dangerous, so it's a tedious job, or one of the issues, especially when I'm speaking with the journalists, they're always concerned about whether robotics means losing jobs, and whether one day we will accept to deal with the robot. Will we ever accept to care our children with a babysitter, or maybe to care an elderly person with a robotized caregiver? There is good and bad, because we also read in the news bad stories about people offering cares to children and to elderly people. But for children, for elderly people, there is also a good use of technology, because the Paro, which is the robot seal, which you saw in the video, is being used for carrying autism in children. So the neuroscientists have shown that you gain something, and you gain more than having the child to interact with the real pet, with the real animal pet. So this has been scientifically proved. And in the same way, some of the rehabilitation that you saw a person which was affected by stroke, that by wearing an exoskeleton, this person had the sensory motor capability as a normal person. But at the same time, there is a risk and there is a danger. And this is also what differentiates research as carried out in Europe from research as carried out in Japan and the US. The differences being that in Japan, because of their culture, heritage, and because of their religion, their Shintoism, they believe in the value of machines, and they believe that machines can fully replace humans. And that's why they really are obsessed by making machines to have the same appearance as humans or as animals, because they even believe that machines can have a soul. This is not the case in the Western culture. At the same time, if we look at some of the video clippings were taken from the DARPA Robotic Challenge, which had a strong coverage in the media, in Europe too, okay? And this is fine, but as a European citizen, as a European scholar, I cannot ignore that this research is funded by DARPA. And DARPA is the agency of the Department of Defense, which means that this same technology can be used for military purposes. Of course, defense in these days is important, and security of citizens, of people is important. And we should use technology. If you can use a robot maybe to find a bomb or just, of course. But there are also some ethical, legal, and societal issues that we should carefully take into account, because the same kind of exoskeleton will allow a normal person to become a superhuman with the capabilities beyond those of a human. So this can have a good use, like a nurse in the hospital to carry a patient, but also it might have a bad use, because you can have some empowered humans, and if these humans are soldiers in a war, this is a bad use of technology. So, I mean, the discussion is much broader than our field. We are both engineers, so we come from technology. But nowadays, doing research in robotics means also to address some ethical, legal, and societal issues which affect not only the expert, the engineers, the roboticists, but all of us. There was an article which now was published 10 years ago already on Scientific American, and it was a statement by Bill Gates, and he declared that in 20 years from then, from 2006, we will have a robot in every home. Now, in the video that I show, you must have noticed the vacuum cleaner Roomba, which many families actually have it. I think the issue is ubiquity and pervasiveness of the technology. What I mean by that is that now each of us, excluding myself, has a smartphone or a tablet, because we depend on this technology, and we are keen also to spend more money. I mean, people tend to spend more money even than they could afford in having the latest model of the technology and things like this. And it's, as you said, in the 70s, every family had a TV, and in the 90s, every family had a PC. So the challenge is whether in a few years from now, we will have an object. I don't want, because if I say robot, the imagination of the people is of android type, of anthropomorphic type. But personally, I don't think that this will be the case. One of the video clippings was about, I don't know if you ever saw it, Jibo. It was the little girl interacting with a sort of sphere, a ball. And actually, this is a project promoted by our colleague at MIT. Her name is Cynthia Brazil. There's a crowdfunding venture around Jibo, and the idea is to sell Jibo for $500. And the appearance of Jibo, in my view, it's not too different from a smartphone or from a phablet. It looked like, and also Jibo can interact with the people in the family, can take pictures, can remind appointment, can give recipes. So I think, just as like companies around the world, of course, including Google Robotics, but it's not only Google Robotics, because Aldebaran in France was bought. Aldebaran, they make Now and Pepper, like two small humanoids. They were bought by Japanese investors, and they have sold some mobile platforms to Japan in like units, like hundreds of thousands. So I think we're not too far from having an object, a smart device, which at all effect, maybe people don't look at Roomba as a real robot compared to the humanoid concept that we have in mind. But in between, I think we will have some device in our environments which will be a sort of PR, personal robot, like a personal computer. This is my feeling. I don't believe into a replacement, because the speed and dexterity and agility of a human, of a football player it's very tough to be replicated by a robot. But I do believe, again, into the value of robotics technology as, in fact, apart, since sensors were mentioned, some teams, they use, sensors to check the performance of the athletes during the games. But also there was, and likewise, you can use drones to check the tactics and how the defense line is kept by your defender, because in the modern football, it's not only the performance of the individual, but it's very much, it's more than years ago as a kind of team game. And but I think, I think that some teams are already using robotics technology as with all the sensor and intelligence and the learning and things like this. But I mean, in terms of having, I mean, RoboCup played with now is a lot of fun. It's a good vehicle to approach science and technology for the kids and also for maybe the students, but clearly, it's not something that we will see. Probably not our generation, and maybe not even our kids. I think we need at least 20-30 years before we can have kind of like a running machine, which would be also, dexterous and agile and technically know it. So it's like I don't. But you can also, I mean, like one use of well, nowadays you can scan all the motion of people. So it's like, what if you can acquire data about the best players, and then you can use this for just also for heritage, to transmit this data to the to the next generation of athletes, and also to see how this has been evolving throughout the years. So I think just as like robotics technology is already used in football, in soccer. But as I say, there's a sort of, as an aid, as a means, which is useful in the same fashion as all the other kinds of technology. So as use it for other sports or other activities of life.
Any comment?
So from my perspective, one of the things that is really missing if you, for example, talk about having human-sized robots playing soccer or stuff like that, and with the performance of the human being, is the reliability. So playing the game is one thing, but soccer players fall, they crash into each other, etc., etc. Currently, robots are not at all capable of having falling strategies, joint protection strategies, and the like. And for example, if you have a look at Justin, so that was the robot that caught those two balls in parallel. If one sensor fails in the whole system, it has 51 degrees of freedom, so there are plenty of sensors inside. The system switches off. But if you have a running robot, there's no way to switch off the system because it will completely be damaged. It's like a human being. When you're falling, you have the reflexes. If you don't have the reflexes, you will have really, really serious injuries. And the same applies to the robots. And we have to work a lot to make the robots more reliable and to deal with, for example, joint failure. If you hurt, for example, your elbow, you're still capable of completing a task, for example, brushing your teeth. But the robots aren't, because the kinematics changes, and most of the people cannot deal with changing kinematics, etc., etc. So this is, from my perspective, one of the most important topics when it comes to system infrastructure and sensors and reliability of the robots. We have to really work on how to deal with failure in the system without switching off the whole system. We have to implement some reflexes that, for example, protect the joints against running into the end of the workspace, etc., etc.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I think we are getting to the end. The time is running very fast. Maybe just the last Yeah, I will give to the end. Just before that, I am a little bit out of these European projects and these things. How do you compare research and R&D in general in the field of robotics in Europe? I don't know, Japan, Korea, China, and United States. Who is leading now? What is going on? Are we working together, or what is happening in Europe? National, European, whatever.
Should I? Yeah, I mean, just as a sort of provocation, being a European roboticist, if you go to Wikipedia, you will find out that more than 90% of the pictures which are related to robotics are from Japanese robots. And this clearly does not reflect, you know, the development of technology in the field. Clearly, Japan is an advanced country in all kinds of technology, and robotics is one. But I don't think that the technology that Markus showed, for instance, at DLR, as well as in other labs around Europe, is second in terms of the technology to the technology being developed in Japan. And also, you know, I personally feel very, very attached to what we have and what we have created in terms of a community in Europe. And I give you just one example. This event, which is taking place now in Ljubljana, which is the European Robotics Forum, is at the apex of a long history of networking and coordination actions across Europe that started in Framework Program 5. So now we are in the 8th Framework Program, Horizon 2020. But actually, some of you, and actually, Jadranom also hosted one of the meetings of EURON, European Robotics Research Network, which was initiated by one of our European colleagues that also left Europe, Henrik Christensen. He was a professor of robotics at KTH, the Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm, in Sweden, and is now the KUKA chair, the KUKA Distinguished Professor at Georgia Tech in Atlanta. And this was one case in which he exported a European model of carrying out research together in consortia, in partnership to the US. Because if you take the most prestigious universities in the US, like Stanford, Carnegie Mellon, MIT, Georgia Tech, you know, those are maybe the top 4 nowadays. They've always been working in a very competitive way, one versus the other. And I mean, it's the American system which is very competitive. Now, with Obama, they have the National Robotics Initiative, which for once, it was the European model of carrying out research as financed by the European Commission, exported to the US. So there's a team, a cluster of the top labs in the US where, you know, and they are promoting the National Robotics Initiative. So in a way, I think if, I don't want to look a sort of, I mean, just biased, but I think that the heritage of all our background, the 2,000 years of history and heritage that we have in Europe, in the end, they pay off, because I think we have grown as a society throughout 2 millennia, and compared to a younger society, I think, you know, we have a certain culture, tradition in this continent that in the US they have less. So this is one example in which they are imitating us. And also the challenges were mentioned. So DARPA Robotic Challenge is one, although, you know, they won't have another one. We have one European project, which is a project that I'm not mentioning because I'm coordinating the project, but it's a project involving the community, and I mean, DLR is one of the partners, is European Robotic Challenges. And a few weeks ago, I was contacted by our friend and colleague, Kazuhito Yokoi, who is a professor of robotics a scientist, he's a scientist at the Advanced Institute of Science and Technology in Tsukuba. and they are willing to launch a huge, this is not official yet, but they're going to launch a huge challenge program in Japan. So, I mean, at the end of the day, I think the technology and the culture and the way of carrying out research in Europe is pretty much at the top, I would say.
Okay. So you share this opinion, have any?
Yeah, I would second that.
Okay.
And from my perspective, what is a good indication is that we can see that lots of the top researchers get back to Europe. If you mentioned Thorsten Kröger, Stefan Schall, lots of those researchers go back to Europe because we have a more sustainable research system than the US has.